Is your debt causing you sleepless nights? Knock your debt out with Debt KO. And your debt won't be the only thing keeping you up at night. Debt KO, free, impartial advice on all your debt.
This is UMAR AHMED for Rafael TV in association with MTK Global. I'm joined by Dan Rafael across Zoom. It's been a bit of a hectic week in boxing, a lot of stories. Of course, the main one being Terence Crawford in a situation with Bob Arum top rank. We'll come on to that in a second, but let's talk the most glamorous division in the world right now, the heavyweight division. A lot's been said about Deontay Wilder's comments. We've spoken to you about it. Let's move on from that. But more interesting recently, he called out Dillian Whyte, Dan. What did you make of that?
Well, I think, look, some people didn't like the type of opponents that Deontay was fighting when he was holding the title. But that, those things are business related. And I've never doubted for a moment, for all the years I've covered Deontay his entire career, that he, as the athlete, was not willing to step up and fight the top guys. So, without the title at this point, and with the possibility of the third fight against Tyson Fury, sort of in limbo, it doesn't surprise me. I mean, Wilder's always been a guy willing to challenge himself against top guys. Obviously, Dillian Whyte, he did get knocked out by Povetkin, and they're supposed to have a rematch. So maybe it's convenient to call a guy out that's got another fight scheduled. But I'll give Wilder the benefit of the doubt and say that if that fight could be made, he'd be more than happy to do the fight. It's a good matchup. Don't you think that would be exciting?
I think Wilder-Whyte makes sense in a lot of ways. Of course, White's got to beat Povetkin in the rematch, which is now looks like a 50-50 fight. What did you make of the list in general? You had Andy Ruiz Jr. on there, Alexander Usyk, Tyson Fury was on there, Dillian Whyte, Joseph Parker, and also Robert Helenius.
Well, in terms of Robert Helenius, I mean, he saw him just defeat Adam Konacki back in March. And that was a fight that was on PBC on Fox, which is Deontay's broadcast partner, and the folks that he fights under their banner. So that's not a total shock. Andy also with that same group. So again, a fight that's probably doable if there was will on both sides. Each fighter was interested. So I know Andy does not have a particular fight set up at this moment. And the other guys, look, Deontay basically by making that list in that interview and saying the guys he wants to fight or is interested to fight, he's just basically calling out the top guys on, in the heavyweight division. All those fighters that you mentioned are all bona fide contenders. They all have, good wins under their belt. They all are guys who are in the mix, in that top level of the weight class. So to hear him say those names is not a complete shock. I mean, obviously he would like the third fight against Tyson Fury. But if that doesn't happen, there's other options out there.
I remember we were both at the Barclays March this year. Packed out Barclays, load of Polish fans, expected an Adam Konacki win. And Robert Helenius won on Fox, as you said. So I guess it does make sense in a way. I think in the UK, people were surprised. They probably wouldn't have known Helenius just knocked out Konacki as well. I think from that list, people in the UK were more shocked by Helenius.
Yeah, I guess they were a little bit. I mean, I think, no matter where you were, it was kind of a surprise. Konacki was a guy they were building up who had been, on the short list to get an eventual fight with Wilder had he defeated Tyson Fury when they met in the rematch back in February. You mentioned about being in Barclays Center at that fight, pretty good crowd there. Adam was a good draw. I was at that fight also. That was the last fight I have attended because I was supposed to go back to New York City a few days later. I came home the day after that Konacki Helenius event. I was supposed to go back to New York City a few days later to cover the Shakur Stevenson featherweight title defense against Miguel Mariaga that was supposed to take place at the Madison Square Garden Theater the following Saturday night. I was going to go up on Thursday, but that was when I got back a couple of days later is when everything started to shut down because of the COVID-19 situation. They had postponed the remainder of the NBA season like that Wednesday night. I remember to myself like, what, probably not the best idea to go. I was at ESPN at the time. The editor that I worked with, had called me up earlier in the day and said, listen, I know you're supposed to go up to the fight. If you don't want to go, don't worry about it. You can, handle it off TV. I mean, if you're not comfortable with traveling, I said, hey, listen, I'll let you know. I haven't really decided what I want to do yet. And like I said, the next day, the next evening, they postponed the rest of the NBA season. I realized this is a lot more serious than I think many people had thought. And at that point, I made the call. I was like, I'm going to cancel my trip. Next morning, I cancel my train ticket, cancel my credential, cancel my hotel room. And then sure enough, later in the day, or maybe it was the next day, Top Rank and the commission canceled the show. So that March 7th event was the last time I've been live at ringside for a boxing match. And then there was several months with no boxing at all. And, thankfully there's some good action back, but it's hard for everybody because even with the few events where there are fans, it is still limited, and those are few and far between.
Well, you said there's some good action back. There certainly is. We expected Tyson Fury to be back in action on December 5th here in London, but that won't be happening. What do you think the next moves are for Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder? We know Joshua's got to get past Pulev, but what do you think Fury and Wilder do next?
Well, I don't think that there's going to be any true decision from either of those guys about what their next fight will be because as best as I know from what both sides have said to me, Shelley Finkel on the side of Deontay Wilder, who's pressing the issue of the mediation, they believe that the language or the option for the third fight should still be in effect. The Tyson Fury side, Top Rank, they maintain that had expired, and now it's going to be up to a mediator to try to see if these two sides can get together and work it out. If they can't do that, then from what Shelley Finkel said, the situation will go to binding arbitration, where an arbitrator would hear both sides and then make a decision that would be the legal result of the situation. It's supposed to start at any time. Maybe it's already started. They've just kept it awfully quiet. But the point is, until that situation has been gone through the process that they're going through, I don't think either guy can make any kind of specific schedule of a fight. Now, Fury was going to do this December 5th fight, and obviously the mediation was kind of hanging over everybody's head. But from what the Fury side says, that was not going to prevent the fight. What prevented the December 5th fight, which was supposed to be against Agit Kabayel, the unbeaten fighter who used to be the European heavyweight champion, that was really a financial situation because, if Tyson Fury is used to making a huge amount of money as he did in the Deontay Wilder rematch and was on target to make a similar kind of pay check for the next fight, and now all of a sudden you're doing obviously a lesser fight, strictly going to be carried by a pay-per-view on BT in the UK with far less resources allocated from ESPN in America and no ability to have fans in the crowd, which would mean probably less sponsorships and that sort of thing. Now all of a sudden you have Frank Warren going to Tyson with a dollar figure that is, a tiny fraction of what he expected to be paid. And at that point, Fury decided he didn't want to do the fight. So I can't blame him for that, but that's the reason. It was, a financial situation, obviously.
I think that's a fair comment until this third fight happened or doesn't happen. Essentially, we know then what Joshua's next move will be. We know what Tyson's next move. We know what Usyk's next move will be, etc. So it'll all play itself out. So that's a fair response. Let's go to the welterweight division now. We saw Crawford stunning stoppage over Kell Brook last weekend, but the main talk has been what's happened since. And Bob Arum said, if he wants to go, he can go. And Terence was very displeased with them comments. I'm sure you've seen and been keeping up with it, Dan. What have you made of that whole debacle with Top Rank and Terence Crawford?
I mean, they're not on the same page right now. They've had their issues for a little while, maybe not, huge issues, but it's been bubbling up for a while, mainly because Terence understandably is frustrated because he is a tremendous Hall of Fame caliber talent, pound for pound type talent, just a one of the greats of this era. And he would like to have the opportunity, understandably, to prove it against the other top guys. He's in a very deep weight class in the welterweight division. There's a lot of good guys that he can potentially face off with. Most notably, obviously, is the unified title holder, Errol Spence Jr. That's a fight that everybody has talked about for a while now. We all want to see it. And it's a very difficult and complicated deal to make for, any number of reasons. And so Crawford hasn't been able to get marquee fights. And Bob Arum, is his promoter, hasn't been able to deliver him the marquee fights. And so when he's putting on these other fights, Bob's getting killed financially on these fights. And he's finally had it up to here, so to speak, and, let Terence and the world know about that. And that's not the kind of thing Bob would normally do, because that's the type of thing that should stay between the fighter and the promoter and not, have them airing their dirty laundry. But once Terence Crawford's team put out, aspects of his contract and made those sorts of feelings known publicly, Arum is not one to take that sort of stuff laying down. And he's a guy that will fight back with everything he's got. So, he was still upset, understandably, because they had made a deal for Terrence to fight Kell Brook, and they had an agreement in place, for a few weeks, but Terrence had not yet signed the paperwork. And so when the Crawford camp, and I actually spoke to Bob about this issue just this morning, when the Crawford camp started to complain to him about why aren't you promoting the fight with Kell Brook, they were hoping they would have like a big splash to announce that fight and some good hype for it during the broadcast for the Teofimo Lopez-Lomachenko fight that had aired on ESPN. And Bob was like, look, we're not doing anything till you sign the contract, because that makes only sense, right? If you have a deal, you're not going to go start promoting the fight and then have somebody come back and try to hold you up for, more money or some other aspects of your deal. Sign the contract and we'll promote the fight like we would, and we'll blow it out. And so finally, after having the agreement in place for like 3 weeks, Crawford finally put pen to paper, signed the contract, I guess during the Lomachenko Lopez telecast, was sent a photo of the signature sheet, at which point they finally announced the fight. But they didn't do any kind of big blowout. There was no video. There was nothing prepared. There was no artwork. They just had a brief mention of it on the broadcast. So that sort of, put back the level of the beginning of the promotion for the Brook fight. And Bob was ticked off about that. Obviously, the Crawford camp was not happy about how it was handled. And there's just a conflict there right now. And, Bob has claims he's lost a ton of money on Crawford fights, says I'll show him the books if he wants. It's enough money to buy me a beautiful house, another house in Beverly Hills. He's already got a house in Beverly Hills and one in Las Vegas. I've actually been to the house in Beverly Hills, and it's a beautiful house. So he thinks, if Terrence Crawford doesn't want to be there, then so be it. They'll fulfill their contract, and if he wants to leave when it's over, so be it. In fact, what he told me is he's not even going to deal with Crawford anymore. He's turning that whole business over to Todd DeBuff, his stepson, and who is the president of Top Rank. Mm-hmm. Bob washed his hands of the Terrence Crawford business, which obviously would indicate that unless there's some kind of significant meeting of the minds, Terrence Crawford is a lame duck with Top Rank, and they're lame ducks as his promoter, and at some point, he'll be moving on. But Bob made the point, if I can add this, he doesn't think that PBC and Al Heyman really want to do a Terrence Crawford Errol Spence fight on their own, because then they're on the hook for everything. At least if they split it between them, Top Rank is they've got some of the risk involved. And Bob made the point also that they could do the fight with PBC if they wanted to call them and try to make a deal. He's happy to do that. But if Crawford is not with Top Rank and they try to attempt to do the fight on their own, he's like, good luck to them, no problem. But they will lose out on the platform of having the pay-per-view available in America on ESPN+. And Bob said to me, when Deontay Wilder and Tyson Fury did their rematch in February, about a third of the pay-per-view buys in the United States were done through the ESPN+ streaming platform. So you have, a number of buys done on the traditional, cable television route. Obviously, a huge amount of buys from that event were done via the satellite services, DirecTV and Dish Network. And then a third of that revenue came from ESPN+ buys. If Heyman's doing that fight on his own under PBC just with Fox, there is no ESPN+ platform, because you have to go through Top Rank if you want to be on there for boxing, and Bob wouldn't do that. So, anybody that thinks just because Terrence Crawford and Top Rank part ways, that suddenly it's going to make it super easy to make the fight, it'll be easier perhaps, but it's still tough.
Well, I'll add, of course, Errol Spence, his first fight back since his car crash, and it's against a world-class opponent in Danny Garcia, so he's got to come through that. Yeah. Just say he does, though. As I say, he beats Danny Garcia. He said publicly that it's got to be 60-40 if me and Crawford fight. Do you think he's got a point, Errol Spence?
No, I mean, that's another reason why the fight probably wouldn't happen, because Crawford's not going to go for 50-50. And I understand where Errol's coming from. I have all the respect in the world for Errol Spence. He has proven himself thus far to be a good ticket seller and to be a guy that can do, decent numbers on pay-per-view. I mean, and when you get past, first of all, the pay-per-view stars in general, there are not that many. In this country, you're probably limited to Canelo Alvarez, whose last few fights have been on DAZN, and his next fight's going to be in DAZN. So he's not even in the pay-per-view. Not even in the pay-per-view market at this point. So Errol Spence is probably, him and Pacquiao maybe are the next best guys, but it's not like he's doing a million buys. For good matchups, he's doing 250, maybe 300, something like that. It still remains to be seen how the Danny Garcia pay-per-view performs. And again, Danny Garcia should not be underrated. I mean, it's not like a fait accompli, let's say, that it's going to be Errol Spence and Terrence Crawford of the future, because Danny Garcia may have a lot to say about the prospect of that fight happening. He's a very good elite welterweight and should not be discounted in the fight whatsoever, in my opinion. But if Errol gets through the fight, it would obviously be the attractive matchup to do him and Crawford. But the 60-40 aspect of that, I don't think that Crawford would go for that, in my opinion. And I've said this about other fights. When you get into a position where you can't agree on what the split is, and it's a close kind of fight where, you can argue a guy 60-40, whatever, 50-50, you know what you do? You make it like 45-45 and do a real prize fight, and the guy that wins gets the extra money. And put your money where your mouth is and make it what it's supposed to be, which is prize fighting. You fight for a prize. You get your guarantee, and you fight for that extra 10%, or whatever the split you decide to put up in that in that pot to go to the winner.
That would solve everything, but somehow I can't see that happening, to be honest.
And by the way, that aspect of a promotion would probably help the hype on the fight. If everybody who knew about the fight was like, oh, they're really fighting for the true prize, like the winner is going to get all this extra money. I'm not saying that's the reason you buy the fight, but it's just another reason on your laundry list of why you might make it get a little more hype about the matchup.
Yeah, it definitely would. I agree with that. Just quickly before we go, of course, we learned a few weeks ago that Canelo Alvarez split up with Golden Boy and Dazn, but he returns on Dazn against Callum Smith. What did you make of him announcing that he's going to be boxing on Dazn?
It's not totally shocking. I mean, the main thing that Canelo wanted to do in his entire litigation in the last couple of years, he wanted to get rid of Golden Boy. He was very unhappy with them. The relationship had been the rockiness of the relationship has been well documented. I went to some of those Canelo fights, the last couple of fights, where he would not even speak to the Golden Boy officials. He wouldn't mention Oscar. He wouldn't talk to Oscar. You could just feel the tension when you walk into the room and they were both there. So that was first and foremost. Obviously, he's not happy that Dazn was not willing to pay his full freight to Golden Boy, to put on his event. He was due $35 million for whatever his next fight was. Golden Boy was supposed to get $40 million. However, he's also a business person. He looked around the landscape, and even though he was talking about different permutations of deals with PBC and Al Heyman, at the end of the day, he wanted to fight in 2020, and the only way that he was able to do that was on Dazn, because there's just not enough time. Here we are closing in on the end of November, and if you want to be in the ring on December 19th, that's just not enough time to mount a legitimate pay-per-view promotion. So his team realized that we have to make the best deal we can, and we'll be back on Dazn on a streaming service. They did a one-fight deal with Eddie to do this fight against Callum Smith. Canelo's own company will be involved in the promotion, also Canelo Promotions, which is something else he wanted to help try to build up. And so he'll take less money than what he would have gotten had he still been within his Golden Boy Dazn contract, had they been willing to pay the full freight. And he'll take on, a top-notch fighter. Now, Callum Smith may not be well-known in America and not considered like a big name, let's say. But nobody that is even a mild boxing fan can say Canelo Alvarez is not willing to fight the best guys, because Callum Smith is undefeated. He is, probably to most people's eyes, the number one super middleweight in the world, other than Canelo, whose experience in that weight class is quite limited. He has the Ring Magazine title, if you like that. I know a lot of people think he lost to John Ryder, but he got his hand raised. It was a close fight. And if you're going to fight in the super middleweight division, Callum Smith is a top-notch opponent. He's a lot taller than Canelo Alvarez. He's got good power. He's got good boxing skills. And he's taking on a real guy. He's not taking on this is not a cakewalk kind of fight. I mean, certainly Canelo will probably be favored in the matchup, but it's a very legitimate, very interesting, good fight. And, from Canelo's perspective, he can get this real fight, on his resume. And when it's over, he can go and do his own business. So if he wants to continue talking to Eddie about some other fight or Dazn, he wants to, go back and reignite discussions about some other matchup with one of the PBC fighters. If he wants to go to Top Rank, who obviously has a pay-per-view platform with ESPN and potential opponents that they might be able to offer him, certainly in the light heavyweight division, if he wants to try that again, or in the middleweight division. He's in a great position. Canelo Alvarez is betting on himself. And, he's taken a gamble against Callum Smith. He's going to make a little less money than he would have otherwise. But I've seen some comments from Canelo who will say, of course money is important, but in his mind, it's not the only thing. He is a very focused guy when it comes to how he's going to be remembered as a professional fighter. And by taking on the best guys, frankly, win or lose, people remember you. And he wants that to happen with him.
Okay, Dan, Rafael, very good talking to you again about this week's kind of boxing news. I'm sure we'll have another catch up soon. Some massive fights to end the year. So yeah, thanks for talking to IFL TV, and as I said, we'll catch up soon.
Thanks a lot, Omar. Always a pleasure, my man. Appreciate it.
Man. Thank you very much.
Is your debt causing you sleepless nights? Knock your debt out with Debt KO. And your debt won't be the only thing keeping you up at night. Debt KO, free impartial advice on all your debt.